Hi everybody and welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James and I'm delighted to be talking to a super interesting guest today, Mr. Richard Sauder, Dr. Richard Sauder, a highly educated man, and a little bit of background on Richard before I bring him on. In his early childhood he experienced first-hand contact with some paranormal phenomena, and that left him a little bit puzzled and thoroughly persuaded that there is much more to the earth than what human perception tells us. Consciousness, mainstream American culture believes. Richard's favourite research and reading interests are underground and underwater bases and tunnels, and that's what we're going to get into today. We're also going to talk maybe a little bit about electronic mind control, human prehistory, which is something really fascinating to me, remote antiquity, the area of history I like to get into, Kundalini energy, and more. A little bit about Dr. Richard Sauder's background, his education. He has a BA in sociology, an MA in Latin American studies, an MS in forestry, and a PhD in political science. He's the author of several books: Underground Bases and Tunnels, What is the Government Trying to Hide?, Kundalini Tales, Underground and Underwater Bases. In addition, Richard has also appeared on a variety of radio and TV programs and is now in the Capricorn Radio Hall of Fame. So without further ado, hi Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you, James. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you here, Richard. It really is, and I love this search. I love this topic, this truth search that I'm on the show, and I'm not particularly well read up on the subject, but I know you are, and I know you've done a pioneering research. So I first of all commend you on that, Richard. This is fascinating. Before we get into, I guess, any of the subject matter today, I'm always interested in the person. You look like a polymath with your variety of intriguing research and interest and education. You've got quite a diverse background of education, and that stands to anybody in research. So let's get into a little bit about that. Why the variety of research? Is this who you are? Is this you like to educate and research yourself in all fields, Richard?
Yes, I have a lot of curiosity about most everything, and I just got caught up in academic pursuits for about 10 or 11 years and accumulated several academic titles. I am not a professional academic. I do not work for or at any university or college, nor do I intend to. I want to say that I've been out of the academic world for many years and never worked in it, having gone through 3 different graduate degree programs. I saw how corrupt and restrictive the mainstream academic world is.
Oh, yeah.
I think even more so now than it was 20 and 30 years ago when I got caught up in academic pursuits. However, in the process of doing all of that academic work, I did learn how to research, how to do a thorough archival investigation, which has stood me in good stead in conducting the research for the books that I've written. There is one book that I have out now that you didn't mention. It's entitled Hidden in Plain Sight.
Sure.
Beyond the X-Files. That's Hidden in Plain Sight, Beyond the X-Files. And in that book, I go even more deeply into the theme of underground and underwater bases and show how this actually goes back centuries to the 19th century and even before. This business of tunneling, of building underground bases, and even to make the underwater bases, at the least, we're talking about going back to the 1960s, and I suspect even earlier. The technology has been around to construct sophisticated undersea bases and tunnels for the better part of a century, and to tunnel underground. Well, people have been tunneling underground for many, many years. I actually give a couple of examples from England.
Oh, yeah.
In the book Hidden in Plain Sight, Beyond the X-Files, it's not just the Americans who have been tunneling for many years. The English have, the French have, the Germans have, the Russians have, the Chinese. It's pretty well going on all over the world. My research has focused primarily on activities centered on the United States, because I hold United States citizenship, and at the time I conducted my research, I was living in the continental United States, so I had access to university libraries, government document repositories, and archives, document archives, and things of that nature. So, for logical reasons, my research focused most intensively on the American aspect of underground and underwater bases and tunnels.
Wow, fascinating. Yeah, you know, Richard, I think there's a underground city or underground bunker in England. It's got its own BBC broadcasting studio and public house for drinking, and it's a wartime one, I think. Yeah, I know that you sparked that memory off.
Well, there were in World War II and in the Cold War era, there was a fair amount of tunneling and underground excavation for command posts and things of that nature. Ostensibly, the Cold War is over, but it looks like the tensions with Russia are higher than ever before because of the United Kingdom and the United States ratcheting up the tensions. It's coming from them. It's not coming from the Russians. I'm persuaded the Russians do not want another world war. I think that the leadership of the United Kingdom and of the United States are, as the English say, barking mad.
I agree, Richard. Well, I live in Northern Ireland, so I'm going to agree with you, Richard.
David, let's take David Cameron, for example.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen anything more pathetic in your life? Just a weak, stupid, ignorant, arrogant man.
You know, Richard, you hit the nail on the head. He's like a man with no backbone. He is the embodiment of a person without a backbone. He's just... Well,
and he's a clone of Barack Obama. You know, they're brothers from another mother. And Barack Obama is the same. He's stupid, he's ignorant, he's weak, and he is surpassing arrogant.
It makes you wonder.
These men compensate for their tremendous incompetence, ignorance, and stupidity with endless arrogance.
It makes you wonder.
I've never seen anything like it.
Makes you wonder then, Richard, in that respect, what you're saying, are these guys like puppets? Are they just being told what to do? Are they stooges?
They are puppets. In the case of David Cameron, clearly he's taking orders from, among other places, well, of course, from the City of London, from the Windsors, from Buckingham Palace. In the case of Barack Obama, he's clearly taking orders from Wall Street, from the Federal Reserve Bank, and you have to wonder what's above all of that. I mean, what's behind the Bank of England? What's behind the Windsors? What's behind the City of London? What's behind the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States? What's behind Wall Street? There is some very evil, hideous, grotesque power operating from the shadows on this planet, and it absolutely is pulling the puppet strings of these men. I don't know if they are men. Is David Cameron really a natural human being? Is Barack Obama really a natural human being? I have questions.
I think there's a fallacy that, you know, there's a two-party dictatorship in England and there's a two-party dictatorship in America. The Reds and the Blues, the Tories and the you know, it's just like there's two people to vote for. And that's the same in Ireland too. There's two main groups of people to vote for. But there's stooges at the top, and then there's stooges above them. And at the end of the day, people in England truly believe that they're voting in a democratic society. Well, at the end of the day, the Queen rules the country, and they all pay homage to her. And it doesn't matter who you vote for, whether it's the red team or the blue team. If there's only two people to vote for, and you don't get to choose those people. They're already chosen for you. You only get to choose the group. You know, or who gets
I'm glad you brought up the Queen, because we have to include her in this circle of so-called human beings who are incompetent, stupid, ignorant, and unbearably arrogant. Now, have you ever heard this woman? She rarely speaks in public. I mean, like never. For all we know, she cannot have a coherent conversation on any topic in any substantive depth. And I rather suspect that one of the reasons that she never has extended public conversations is because she is just stupid.
You know, you point out a very good point, Richard. I mean, if somebody is in that level of hierarchy, let's say the royal family, they're secluded from the reality of the world. They're secluded from social networking. They're included from social situations where they can develop themselves mentally to a good aptitude to understand and comprehend what people are, what they can say, their emotions, their pathology, or even, you know, their down to earth, if you want to call it that, you know. But if somebody is in that level of seclusion, how do we even know she could hold a conversation that is not even just intelligent, but as in socially not awkward? How do we know that? I mean, she must only talk to a handful of people.
Well, we don't. All we know is that she's an ugly, frumpy little woman that walks around in terrible little house frocks or house coats with the most ugly coats you could ever imagine, with terrible hats that look like they were picked out of a 19th century haberdashery 135 years ago, and with these clunky old black shoes that look like the Wicked Witch of the West in the Wizard of Oz. Those are the shoes she's been wearing for the last 85 years.
Wow.
And from where I sit, I think I fairly well evaluated her. Ignorant, stupid, incompetent, and unbearably arrogant, presuming that she is above it all. Listen, with my education, I'm better qualified than her to run a major national organization, to address the needs of the world. You are, with your education and with your social network. In fact, I'm better qualified than the President of the United States or David Cameron to run a major national government by dint of my life experience and also my education. But someone like me and someone like you will never get within 10 miles of a position like of a substantial national leadership.
Exactly.
Anywhere.
Exactly.
Anywhere. And that is by design. Because if people with a broad and diverse life experience, with a broad, deep, and diverse educational background, and with a wide circle of social contacts across social classes, if that type of person were to come to power in countries all over the world, don't you see that would change the entire power structure of the planet? And so that cannot happen. That is actively prevented to happen. And instead, stupid, incompetent, ignorant, and unbearably arrogant people are thrust right up to the top of the heap. They are selected because they are stupid, ignorant, incompetent, and tremendously arrogant.
This is what I love, is speaking to a political scientist or political analyst, Richard. You get an intelligent conversation, and you made a very, very good point again. And this is what I love about talking politics to somebody who's educated in it. I mean, politics to run a country involves doing business, okay? And that's whether it's networking, with business, bringing in the books, bringing in the trade, running organizations that are either government part owned, oil resources. I mean, then there's the infrastructure for the electricity, the water networks, and well, that's what we do in the UK. I know it's slightly different in America, hospitals as well. And they bring in the worst people. I mean, they bring in people that have no business training into these political scenarios to run the countries into the ground, basically. But like you say, Richard, that is by design. And anybody with qualifications in either politics or business, personally, I think you should find the best business managers on the planet to run a country, not really politicians. At least the business end of the politics, because it does involve large sums of money. Countries are money, but you never see that. You see these.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily do that, and I'll tell you why. Mm-hmm. Because in the process of doing my doctorate in political science, I encountered people doing Masters of Business Administration. I studied some public finance and some microeconomics. Pardon me. And I discovered that the business world is thoroughly criminally corrupt. Those are the last people I would bring in to run anything, because they have a criminal mentality. They are absolutely just riven with greed. And when you actually study public finance as it's presented in the universities, public finance, microeconomics, and those kinds of things, you discover that it's a great criminal scam based on tremendous deception and dishonest schemes that are very elaborately designed to enrich the few at the expense of the many. And so those are the very last people I would bring in to handle the books or the budget or the economy.
For sure.
For any country, because those people, let me tell you, are now in positions of power in Britain, in the United States. There are plenty of people they're coming out of Harvard and Yale, out of Cambridge, out of Oxford, etc. People with PhDs and doctorates in economics and in public finance and business administration, and they are running the world straight over the edge of the proverbial cliff. You know, they're already in positions of power, for sure, and they are destroying the planet.
You know, Richard, I've never voted my entire life, and I refuse to. And people always say to me, "Well, how can you vote to make change if you don't vote?" And I'm like, "Well, no, you give me a fair system, and I'll vote. I won't vote for the two-party dictatorship. It's a flawed system, and all I'm doing if I participate in the flawed system, and sometimes they try to make you to vote in this country if you're on the electorate, and I refuse to open the door. I would go and do jail time before I would vote. And when you give me a system that's fair, I'll do that. And I won't pay the TV license either. I mean, I've got TV license men knocking at the door. I turn the telly on, I turn the radio up, and I make sure they know I'm in the house, but they have the right to enter my home. But they will knock at that door and they will stand like vigilantes so that you can pay this extortionate fee, whether you watch telly or not, because you own a home. And then they send it to the BBC, which goes to fund God knows what. Like, it's, the corruption is abound, and politics, it's like, do you say mafiosa? Do you dare say criminal? It is criminal. It's a criminal system, and it's got an underbelly to it. That's really, it's money orientated. Is that a fair way to describe the world, Richard? Is that what we're looking at?
Well, you're being much too kind. It's a criminal mafia. Whether you're talking about in Britain or in the United States or in practically any country in the world. It's the whole system of nation states is a globe-spanning, interwoven, interlocking system. And in each country you have the resident criminal mafia. And many of these mafias operate internationally and cooperate internationally. A great example would be the United States of America Mafia, the Canadian Mafia, the so-called United Kingdom Mafia, the Australian Mafia, the New Zealand Mafia. Those 5 mafias tend, and have for a very long time, to cooperate internationally and have created no end of global mayhem and chaos to promote their essentially their Anglo-Saxon imperial project. And you can say, they used to say, the sun never sets on the British Empire.
For sure.
And it's in vogue to say that the British Empire has collapsed, and yet you look at this globe-spanning network of Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand, and they're poking their nose into everything. They have their troops all over the place. They're spying on everyone and everything, in massive violation of universal human rights and civil liberties. It's massively criminal. It's massively corrupt. It's massively intrusive. It's oh so wrong on many levels, at an extremely in every fundamental level. And for that reason, I think that this Anglo-Saxon imperial project is more dangerous than ever.
Sure. Richard, let's tie this back into bases. Let's say we're painting an accurate picture here of the five.
Well, let's say with respect to the underground bases.
Are these guys out to protect themselves? Are these guys going to... let's talk about the military bases.
There are different functions for the underground bases and underwater bases. Let's just name some of them, and I'll explain to you what I'm talking about.
Sure.
The so-called British base, smack dab in the middle of the Indian Ocean, Diego Garcia, it's a British base, military base, but it's been taken over by the Americans. I think, in theory, it's a British base, but really, the major military power there is the United States, the Pentagon forces. And it's a big, sophisticated facility, right? And it's like a huge aircraft carrier in the middle of the Indian Ocean. They have docks there for ships and submarines, great big long runway for almost any kind of military aircraft, and then in Australia, in the middle of the Australian outback, there is one of the largest and most mysterious underground bases in the world at Pine Gap. In theory, Australian territory is under the control of the Australian government. In reality, the facility at Pine Gap is under the control of the American military and the American 3-letter espionage agencies, such as the NSA, the CIA, the National Reconnaissance Office, etc. And the Australian government, including the Australian Prime Minister, don't go in. My understanding is even the Australian Prime Minister cannot go in. Entry is barred even to the head of state of Australia, and yet that facility is located in the geographic center of the country of Australia. In New Zealand, there's a very heavy espionage presence in New Zealand. Why? Because when all of the heavy stuff goes down, New Zealand is intended to be a lifeboat for the Anglo-American elite, New Zealand and Australia. But New Zealand is somewhat more remote. It's further out into the Pacific. And the idea is that if and when everything goes south in a radioactive cloud of dust in the northern hemisphere, courtesy of Whitehall and the Pentagon, etc., that the Anglo-Saxon elite will board their luxury jets and they will fly away to safety in New Zealand. At least that's their plan. And then in Canada, there's a great deal of secret. I've heard rumors about underground bases beneath the Canadian Rockies in the western provinces of Canada, and I believe them. At Thunder Bay in Ontario, going back to the Cold War days, there was a major underground command and control center run by NORAD, jointly staffed by the American and the Canadian military. It was an analog to the underground base beneath Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado. And so you have these countries, and then, of course, in the case of England, I think there's an absolute anthill beneath the City of London. I wouldn't put any limits past what's down there, including an executive suite for Satan himself. And I'm not joking.
Sure.
An executive suite, so that when the Dark Lord is visiting London, he can reside in creature comfort, in demonic comfort, 2,000 feet below ground. I don't know what goes on beneath the City of London. You have to understand that on this planet there's certain dark occult power centers. The City of London is one of those.
Oh, yeah.
Washington, D.C. is one of those.
That's correct, yeah.
Vatican is one of those. Southern Manhattan is one of those places. There are some others, but those are some of the major ones that are publicly known. So you have to understand that the City of London, the so-called square mile, goes back at least to Roman imperial times, goes back 2,000 years. Why is it called the square mile? Because when Caesar went over into the British Isles with his legions, he had a reason for going there, number one. There was a great civilization in Britain, a great Celtic civilization, and run by the Druids. And it was Caesar's business, if there was a center of political, economic, or military power anywhere, to bring in his legions and just set to work killing people by the thousands to subdue any rivals to Roman imperial power. And that's what they did in France. That's what they did in Britain. He went down to Egypt, and his plans right before he was assassinated, he was on his way within 2 weeks or less with his legions to march into the area we now know as Iran and Iraq. So that a British imperial project of subduing the Middle East goes way back, and the Americans, of course, have taken up the charge from the British. But it goes back 2,000 years, at least. That was Alexander left Greece,
left a legacy,
and undertook to subdue what we now know as the Middle East. And so it's been over and over. You have seen this Western imperial project, at least from the time of Alexander. Then Caesar, his ambition was to repeat the exploits of Alexander and to march east with his legions. And then, of course, the British, and then the Americans, and you see how well it's going right now for the Americans.
Richard, are these guys, let's call them the monarchs, the elites, the oligarchs, are these guys so rich with their money? Have they just got nothing to do with it, and as a result they're paranoid about some cataclysm coming in and frantic about their, hierarchy collapsing, and they go, well, we've got all this money because we know that these guys are, like, in all intensive purposes, omnipotent with their endless bank accounts. So, is that what they're doing? They're protecting against a cataclysm? Is that too simple a thought, or is that pertinent?
I don't know. There are various factors. In the case of the City of London, for example, when Caesar went into what is now known as England, and they called it Britannia. So And by the way, when you hear the song "Rule Britannia,"
Mm-hmm.
Britannia was a name the Romans gave to the place.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to. That's really a Roman imperial hymn, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And what do they mean when they see? And where was the center of Roman power in Britannia?
Mm-hmm.
It was in the square mile, which is now known as the City of London. Well, why did the Romans choose to literally erect an imperial military wall around that square mile and reinforce and garrison that square mile? I don't know. I rather suspect because it was already an important political, economic, and military center that the Romans just came in and took over and then appropriated for their own use. But all of this goes way back. So in the case of building these underground bases, my guess is that some of them have been built at ancient power sites that go way back thousands of years, as is the case with the City of London. Mm-hmm. And when you hear the song "Rule Britannia," that was the Roman name for what we now know as the United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. So that what is regarded as being an English song, oh no, sir, it's actually a hymn to ancient Roman imperial power, which is carried over down through the centuries. And to this day, these so-called three cities, the City of London, Vatican City, and the so-called District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., in the United States, are actually independent city-states. Mm. A lot of people outside of Washington, D.C. think of it as the capital of the United States of America. In reality, it is an independent city-state that has conquered.
Just like the Vatican and London City as well, yeah.
That has conquered the United States. If you really look into the deep politics of the so-called United States of America, and if you really read the United States Constitution according to the letter of the law, the scope of power of the so-called District of Columbia is strictly constrained and curtailed and circumscribed. Mm-hmm. But over the centuries, it has expanded its power and arrogated unto itself control of the so-called United States of America. And it amounts to a coup d'etat. Yeah. That's been put in place bit by bit over the course of 2 centuries. Wow. So that what exists now is not at all what was intended by people like Patrick Henry or George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or James Madison or James Monroe or Benjamin Franklin, etc. More than 200 years ago.
Sure.
And in the case of Washington, D.C., like the City of London, there is a underground network of levels going down and down. Beneath the White House, for example, there is a very deep, very, very, very large and sophisticated underground installation. I mean, it goes way down. When tourists visit Washington, D.C., and they drive around on these tour buses, and they drive past the White House, or maybe even in the past, people went in for tours. I'm not sure that there are public tours anymore of the White House, but in the past there were. And even in decades ago, even half a century ago, if you went in on a tour to the White House or drove by, you would assume, well, I've been to the White House. In reality, what lies beneath the White House vastly exceeds in size and scope what you see above ground. What exists beneath the surface in Washington, D.C. is much greater in scope than what you see above the surface. Mm-hmm. In other words, it's all an illusion. It's a false facade. And this would be the case for a lot of cities. It certainly would be the case for Manhattan, a lot of London, mm-hmm. Paris, and Moscow, in Tokyo.
Wow.
In Tokyo, my understanding is there are hundreds of miles of secret tunnels beneath Tokyo. The Japanese civil engineering is some of the best in the world. The Japanese are great at tunneling, excavating, notwithstanding the fact that the nuclear reactors at Fukushima, Daiichi Fukushima, have catastrophically failed. And by the way, 5 of those 6 reactors are of American design. 3 of the 6, I believe, were built by General Electric, which is an American, one of the largest engineering companies in the world. And 5 of the 6, I believe, were designed by General Electric. So the Daiichi Fukushima nuclear reactor complex is more American than Japanese.
Wow.
So what you saw fail in Japan was actually a failure, a massive failure of so-called American high technology, and you see what happened.
You know, sorry, Richard. Just a point worth noting. It was the Greeks when they were sailing around the coast of Britain. They called the painted people, the Celts, the native Celts, the Pretaniks, Pretannniks, and the Pretaniks became known as the Britannics, and that's when the Romans picked up the nickname Britannica. And I've never met a British person who can tell me that, Richard. They don't seem to know their own history. They think that Britannia is.
I've known a lot of British people over the years, and many of them assume that British culture is very sophisticated and advanced and civilized. But if you actually look at the history of Britain and the British people, especially over the last 4 centuries, they're just bloody barbarians. They have carried out some of the most ghastly atrocities known to humankind, all the while waving their Union Jack flag and tromping around the world singing that ridiculous Rule Britannia song.
You know what
it's pathetic. It's pathetic. If you want to talk about British culture, let's talk about how pathetic it is.
Do you know what we call the British flag in Northern Ireland, Richard?
I don't know.
We call it the butcher's apron, because they butchered the world underneath their apron. Their apron was the British flag, so we call it the butcher's apron. That's its nickname, which I think is quite apt.
You mean the Union Jack? That's what you say?
Yeah, we don't call it the Union Jack. We call it the butcher's apron. It means the Union Jack flag. So
yeah, well, that's true. I mean, if you look at Canada for God's sake, to this day, there's an ongoing genocide against Native peoples in Canada.
Yeah.
What the British, and Canada is a British Commonwealth nation.
Yeah.
What the British and their successor suck-ass government in Ottawa have done is, it cannot be excused, James. It is not excusable.
Yeah. And
yet they march around the world, putting on airs as if they have a sophisticated culture. In reality, the British culture is hideous. It's grotesque. And yet you don't see this. I mean, what comes out of Oxford? What comes out of Cambridge? What comes out of those finishing schools they have in what's the name of it? Eton is one of them, I believe.
Eton, yeah.
It's just they have produced centuries worth of monsters. Monsters
True.
that masquerade as prime ministers and peers and members of parliament. I'm telling you, they are monsters in human form. So I don't have any use for so-called British culture and their so-called English civilization. Piss on it.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, getting back to the underground and underwater bases, I'm told that there's a major submarine base on the northwest coast of Scotland.
That's true. I have heard this one, Richard. They seem to operate a lot of their subs out of Scotland for some reason. I don't know whether.
Yeah, they come and go. Well, you have to understand the role of Scotland in all of this.
It's more isolated up there.
Scottish Rite Freemasonry plays a huge role to this day in the British ruling system, and also in the ruling system in the United States and in other English-speaking countries in the world. Scottish Rite Freemasonry, for whatever reason, has played a big role down through the centuries and continues to this present day. So within Scotland, there is, of course, a contingent of Scottish Rite Freemasons, and so Scotland is one of the power centers from which this ugly Anglo-Saxon Hydra projects its power. And there is, on the north coast of Scotland, the northwest coast, I've been told there's a massive underground submarine base, and the military submarines come into this base through tunnels underwater. They come in from the Atlantic, from the open sea.
I've actually lived in the Outer Hebrides. I worked there on wind farms. That's what I worked as an engineer most of my career. Mostly water treatments or wind farms, and I've been up all around northwest Scotland. People don't realise how isolated northwest Scotland is. Its prime location, number one, is part of the British Empire still today, and number two, it's isolated. And once you get up to past northern England, the population starts to really fall off. I mean, I'm at the top of north, and it's cold.
Very desolate. Yeah. It's very desolate countryside. There's as you observe, there's a very low human population per square mile. Yeah. And it's, in terms of human population, as you say, the northern parts of Scotland, once you get away from Edinburgh and Glasgow, and you go north, you got some small sheep farming villages and fishing villages, and that's it. Yeah. I mean, there are very few people. It's not a desert in the sense that it rains and it snows and there is some vegetation, but it is bleak, desolate countryside. And when I was a young man, I actually hitchhiked through Scotland in the dead of winter. I came
up, really?
I went up as far as Ben Nevis.
You did?
In Loch Ness. And in the winter, I mean, I hitchhiked through that country in the snow, my man, in the wind and snow.
Hey, Richard, did you do the Ben Nevis challenge? Where you go up to the top?
No, I didn't. It was challenging enough just to hitchhike up there
in the
middle of winter in the wind and the snow. It was cold.
Well, that was winter time for you. I actually did the Ben Nevis challenge. I went up to the top and back down again in 5 hours and 5 minutes. That was my record time.
You did.
That was pretty tough going. I did. I mean, the record. I mean, an average time would be 8. So I was pretty proud of myself.
My Ben Nevis challenge was that I hitchhiked right along the base of Ben Nevis and came down the northern side of Loch Ness in the dead of winter. In fact, I came through there in the night. I was stuck out there in the middle of a blizzard, actually.
Oh my God!
In the nighttime.
That's pretty crazy, dude. That's pretty crazy.
Well, I was picked up by this guy who was towing a skiff or a dinghy. Behind, he had a pickup truck and was towing a small boat on a trailer behind the pickup truck. The snow was falling heavily, and the road was covered with ice and snow. So he picked me up. He was actually a lighthouse keeper, and was headed down to the coast to go out by boat to the lighthouse.
Wow!
And so he would go out, you see, in the boat to the lighthouse, and then his replacement would use the same boat to go back on shore. And that's how they do it, or they did it then, back in early 1976. And so he gave me a ride down further, closer to the border with England, and let me out. So there I was in the snow in southern Scotland in the night, and hitchhiking.
You are a proper adventurer, Richard.
London.
If you climb Ben Nevis in winter time, you've got a pair of kahunas for sure.
Well, here's what happened. So there I was, and the next guy who picked me up was an ex-diver for the Royal Navy, and was then working offshore in the North Sea as this was mid-1970s. He was doing, working, there's a network of pipes on the
North Sea,
seabed of North Sea.
Sure.
And they need to send guys down there to build that. They actually do heavy construction underwater. Mm-hmm. And so that was his job. He's paid quite well. He was getting like $100 an hour in 1976.
Oh, yeah.
God knows those guys now must be making $1,000 an hour.
It's pretty gruesome and dangerous work, though.
It's extremely dangerous work.
Yeah.
And there are very, very few people who have the extremely unique skill set to do that. Very few people who will do it, number one, and who have the skill set to do it.
Yeah.
He was one of them. Anyway, this guy was driving a really snappy little sports car. I don't know what it was, a Maserati or Ferrari or something like that. It was really low slung and fast. So he downshifted through all the gears and stopped and opened the door and said, "You need a ride?" And I said, "Please." So he said, "Get in." So I got in, and this guy went from 0 to 100 miles per hour in about 15 seconds. It was a white knuckle ride. Within 10 seconds, I was thinking, a maniac, a psychopath has picked me up. I got to get out of here. And I was trying to work up the courage to tell him, just stop the car, let me out. I just stop. But after about 15 seconds, I observed that everything was under control.
Yeah.
He was going 100 miles per hour in the snow and ice, in the dark, headed down towards England and southern Scotland. And with a normal driver, under normal circumstances, that would be borderline suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
With him, I observed that, this guy,
he's handling the vehicle.
Improbable as it is, everything is under control. So somehow he could do that. He could drive in ice and snow in this really souped-up little sports car and go really fast, just passing other people.
Wow.
And keeping up a conversation. And I also observed that he had liquor on his breath. The guy was liquored up.
Oh, wow.
And he'd just gone around to the pub, and he was headed south to London. And he took me all the way down to London.
Oh, wonderful. Richard, there's so much I want to get into on the show. I mean, I'd need to do a show on each topic, to be honest, to do it well. But for posterity, I want to touch on a few things. Let's focus on America for the moment. These deep underground mesas, are they all linked up? There's rumors that these are all linked up by tunnels. There's not just...
I don't know. I think some of them are.
By super trains.
You have to understand there are different kinds of them. Many different agencies and organizations have underground facilities.
Mm-hmm.
The military agencies certainly do,
mm-hmm.
but so do other government agencies and also non-government agencies.
Non-government?
Now, some of them can be extremely large and very deep and very sophisticated and accommodate hundreds or even thousands of people in some degree of creature comfort. I'll give an example. One would be the Mount Weather underground base that's run by FEMA, the
mm-hmm.
Federal Emergency Management Agency,
sure.
which is now an agency within the Department of Homeland Security in the United States. That base goes back probably at least to the 1950s. So over half a century.
Oh, wow.
But it's larger now than it was. And if you don't have a security clearance, you won't get inside. So I don't have a security clearance. I've never been inside. But I can tell you, just from the open information that's available, it is big, it's deep. A lot of people can live and work inside there. And it is a very active base. It's about an hour's drive outside of Washington, D.C., in the Appalachian Mountains. So that's one example. That's not a military base, but one that is somewhat north of there, also in the Appalachians on the border between Maryland, and Pennsylvania. This would be the so-called Raven Rock or Site R complex. Site R, the R refers to Fort Ritchie, which is a nearby military base, and more or less has had an administrative function for the Site R base for many years. And just to the south of there, in the Catoctin Mountains of northern Maryland, is the Camp David facility.
Oh, yeah.
Camp David is the so-called presidential retreat for American presidents. They usually helicopter to Camp David. It's just, I don't know, a half-an-hour helicopter ride away from Washington, D.C. And my information is that there are just miles of deep tunnels beneath Camp David. One of the people I spoke with who's been in there was a contractor. He was sent in to do a certain specific function periodically. And he told me that from what he saw, it was so big, so massive, so extensive, that he seriously doubts that any one person has in his or her mind the complete layout of the place. It's just a rabbit's warren of rooms, wow, I don't know, installations, tunnels, airlocks, stairs, elevators. It just sprawls. It just goes on and on for miles. Now that is on maps. Technically, it's a United States Navy military reservation, and it was built by the Seabees, which are the civil engineering and marine engineering arm of the United States Navy. Its security detail is run by the United States Marines, and it's operated as a presidential retreat.
Yeah.
In the news, if you ever see any pictures of it, you see some rustic cabins in the woods in the hills of northern Maryland. That's just window dressing. That's nothing. The real action takes place underground, and from everything I've been told, it's just huge. The rumor is that Site R and Camp David are connected to each other. My mother lived for years in southern Pennsylvania, and the rumor is that the tunnels run up from Washington, D.C., all the way up into southern Pennsylvania, and that the bigwigs come up through those tunnels in their armored limousines, that the limousines just drive up through the tunnels. So and I believe those stories. Those are stories that the locals have in that region of North America. And I believe that the Appalachians, running up and down the east coast of the United States, pretty well from Maine all the way down into the deep south, into northern Alabama and northern Georgia, that's a distance of well over 1,000 miles.
Sure.
Probably 1,500 miles, maybe a little more. That there are many installations in the Appalachians. I just named a couple of them, 3 of them actually, in the Mid-Atlantic region, Site R being one, Camp David being another one, Mount Weather being yet a third one. I've been told of others. I believe there are others, and I suspect that running up and down that mountainous axis of the Appalachians and Allegheny Mountains, Alleghenies lie just to the west of the Appalachians. I believe there are quite a number of underground installations, and I do believe probably a fair number of them are connected. As to whether they're connected by high-speed trains, I can't say, but I am certainly very open to that possibility. I'll give you one example. In the little book Hogs in the Tunnel, which I briefly cite in my book Hidden in Plain Sight, there's an anecdote about a high-speed underground tunnel that goes out the access corridor between Washington, D.C., the Pentagon, and the International Airport at Dulles, which is in Virginia, the state of Virginia to the west of the Washington, D.C. Federal reservation, federal political reservation. And I believe that story. In fact, my guess is such a high-speed underground tunnel probably continues west out into West Virginia, where there are quite likely other underground facilities. I'll give you an example of one. At Green Cove, West Virginia, there's an underground facility. Here's yet a fourth example of an underground facility in the Appalachian region of the United States. Green Cove is run by the United States military and the NSA. It's an important listening post for the NSA, where they download a lot of data from their spy satellite network, and then they run it through there's an underground facility there. So, there's it's Green Cove Springs, I think is the name of the place. That's just across the border from Virginia in the mountains of West Virginia. So there's four right off the top of my head. I believe there are certainly many more. Those are just some of the ones I've been able to identify from the open literature.
Richard, we're going to take a quick break, but before we do, I want you to just give out the website to the listeners where they can get copies of your books. And by the way, you've done prolific research, and if anybody wants to understand what we're talking about, you're going to have your mind blown by these books. So I got to say that. But please give us.
I think that if anyone wants to understand this topic, probably they should start with my books and then go on from there. And all of my books that are currently in print can be accessed from my blog site. The right-hand sidebar. They're all there. You just click on the covers. My blog site is eventhorizon.blogspot.com. That's eventhorizon.blogspot.com. You can also Google my name on any major internet search engine, Richard Sauder, R-I-C-H-A-R-D, and the last name is spelled S-A-U-D-E-R. And you can Google my name and you should come up with my blog site.
Oh, for sure. Richard, we're going to take a quick break there and we're going to come back. I want to get your thoughts on Colorado and much more. But pause for a moment and take a drink. We'll be back in a moment. Hi everybody, and welcome back to Capricorn Radio. You're talking to your host James, and we've got Richard Sauder on the line. Dr. Richard Sauder, what an intellectual guy we've got on the show today. And Richard's books are fascinating. We have the Richard Sauder Briefing, Hidden in Plain Sight Beyond the X-Files, Underground Bases and Tunnels, What is the Government Hiding, and Underwater and Underground Bases. What a fascinating collection of books you have put together, Richard. Continuing on the underground bases, let's focus on that. I wanted to get your thoughts on Colorado Airport, just like I said before the break. It's very controversial, I know, but what's your take on the Colorado Airport scenario?
I don't know what is beneath the airport. I've been there more than once.
Oh, wow.
There are some tunnels. There are tunnels beneath the airport for baggage. There are also little passenger train shuttle cars that go out through a tunnel system to the concourses from the main terminal, from the main airport terminal. So a lot of the infrastructure for the airport lies underground. In that regard, it's different from many other major airports. I don't know if the extensive structures that some people are claiming are beneath the Denver airport are there or not. I just can't say. I went through the place with the actual director of the airport's physical plant. She gave me a personal guided tour of the airport. She gave me about an hour to 2 hours of her time. And we just went all over the place. I didn't see these places that people are sensationally claiming are there on the internet. So I can't really speak to that. I've been there. I had the major tour. I spoke to a couple of civil engineers who were part of a local citizens watchdog group who were on site throughout almost daily throughout the airport's entire construction. And I asked them point blank if they saw evidence of a secret underground facility beneath the Denver airport. And they both told me no. They were not any government employees. They were from a citizens watchdog cost overrun committee. Here's what I think about the Denver airport. I think it was a great money laundering scheme. The Bush family has a lot of business interests in Colorado. And I think, among other things, the whole Denver airport project, which ran billions of dollars over cost, was a vast money laundering machine for Bush family business interests at one level. So I can't say anything about secret underground facilities at the Denver airport. I can say that on one of the occasions that I flew in there, we were well away from the main terminal area or from any of the concourses, passenger concourses. The plane had landed. We'd gone out to the end of the runway, and we're taxiing back in. Beside the runway, there was a large cement truck with the huge telescoping arm of the sort that's used nowadays to pump concrete. These arms can be quite long. You've probably seen them.
Oh, yeah.
And there was, not too far from the runway, there was a pipe sticking up maybe half a foot above the ground. It couldn't have been a foot in diameter, about that. And the concrete was being pumped down that pipe. So the clear implication is that something was being constructed underground, way out away from the terminal, along the runway. Now, what that something might have been, who was doing it, and with what money, what reason, I can't tell you.
That's incredibly interesting, Richard. I know that's one of the common reports that people are saying there's construction work going on very far from the airport, and it seems to be...
Yes, so that's what I'm saying. I'm not, if there's something there, I'm not persuaded it's right under the airport. It may be some distance away, like a mile away or 2 miles away. So when people say there's something beneath the airport, understand that it's a vast expanse of land that sprawls for miles. So there may be something underground near the Denver airport, but right under the terminal complex, I'm not sure there's anything much beyond the airport infrastructure that's right beneath the main terminal complex and the concourses. Now, farther away,
in terms
a mile or 2 or 3 or 5 miles, there could be something.
In terms of engineering, Richard, it would be perfect for a multitude of reasons. Number one, you would have a perfect front. You have a building project above the ground and another one under the ground or nearby. Second of all, if you did want to have an underground facility for military purposes, you would have an airport then shuttle people in. You could then link up the underground subterranean network at the airport at a later date.
Except that, I understand, James, except that here's the thing. In the event of a real shooting nuclear war, say the Russians, the Chinese, if they drop 5 3-megaton warheads down on top of the Denver airport, what's going to be left beyond a 300-foot hole in the ground and not one living thing for 20 miles on either side? So that's why, and in that scenario, who's going to be flying in and out of the Denver airport? No one.
No one. It's in an unusual place. Is it not very far from the Colorado City? It's apparently outside the...
Well, it's outside of Denver. They built limited access highway to get out there, like expressway. It's, I don't know, 10 or 20 miles outside of town. This is more the norm with American cities because with the large passenger planes you have today and the hustle and bustle of a major airport, it's really dangerous to put them close to major population centers. So the trend more and more is to move major airports, whether it's Dulles outside of Washington, D.C., or Atlanta Hartsfield outside of Atlanta, or O'Hare out to the west of Chicago, or the Denver airport, miles outside of town. That more and more is the practice, beyond which real estate, the closer you get to a major metropolitan area, the more expensive real estate is. If you go 20 miles outside of the city, you're going to pay a lot less money per acre to buy X number of thousands of acres of land.
So the location is really fitting with putting the airport there. It's really kind of it's not not really conspiratorial then, is it, to put the airport there? It's probably prime location.
Well, there are economic considerations and public safety reasons for doing that. With respect to Colorado, there are other underground installations in Colorado. My understanding is that Lockheed Martin has two major research facilities to the west of Denver in the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains. Supposedly there are underground facilities related to those. They're both sited hard up against right into the side of at the foot of the mountains. And then Table Mountain, north of the Denver area, to the north or northeast of Boulder, is run by the United States Commerce Department. They do a lot of electromagnetic testing up there. There is an underground facility beneath Table Mountain. It's called a mountain, but it's actually a very low mesa. It's not a mountain at all. But there is an underground facility there. Of course, at Cheyenne Mountain, there's one. I've been told that Cheyenne Mountain is truly large and deep, far larger and deeper than has been publicly divulged, and that, in fact, one of the places that there are several huge, very technologically sophisticated underground bases in the continental United States. These are science fiction-like industrial facilities that can jumpstart late 20th century, early 21st century technological civilization from zero. And that's their intended function in the event of cataclysm or apocalypse.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Sorry, Richard. I'm glad you mentioned that, and I want to get this in. I'm sorry for interjecting. I know from my own research into ancient history, and I think Turkey is probably one of the best examples of underground cities and tunneling systems. Derinkuyu probably was able to house 20,000 people and even had doors where they were able to lock themselves inside. And it makes a lot of people wonder, certainly in the last 20 years, that in ancient history we may have had cataclysms that we tried to protect themselves from and hide underground. In that respect, do you think that the elitist groups that we've been talking about on the show are in present knowledge of something? Has anybody come forth to tell you this, or are they in knowledge of a cataclysmic event that they're not going to tell us? No,
but I think you can use your common sense. I did ask that to one of my sources during the course of my research, and certainly at the highest levels of the alphabet soup agencies, they are aware that there have been major planet-altering and civilization-altering cataclysms in the past. They are aware of that. And I was told that one of the things that at least some of the bases are designed as a consequence of is that they are aware that things like a pole shift is a possibility, or a change in the physics of the Earth's rotation is is a possibility, or asteroid strikes, or certainly nuclear war. They have themselves prepared for nuclear war, or for
atmospheric.
A variety of. They're aware of a variety of potential catastrophic scenarios, and to a degree, at least some of these facilities have been built, designed, provisioned, stockpiled, with the knowledge that on any given day, almost any given event, however improbable, can occur. And so one of the things that they have done is create, in the United States at least, they've created a series of very large, very deep, extremely technologically sophisticated industrial production facilities, such that were topside civilization to be catastrophically destroyed, they would be able to independently build from scratch a generic functioning automobile. They could make the tires, they could make the transmission, they could make the engine block and the pistons, they could make the wheels, they could make the steering wheel, they could make the headlights, everything, the seats, from A to Z, the spark plugs, you name it, all of it they could make from scratch. They could make the windshield. Mm-hmm. They could make a motorcycle. They could make a functioning bicycle or lawn mower or a television set or a basic functional telephone or a microwave oven or a tabletop radio.
Incredible.
In other words, if it all goes to hell and back, they don't intend to start over with sticks and stones and bows and arrows and spears. They intend to start back up in 1985. Yes, sir. Wow.
It's amazing. This whole thing is amazing.
They're aware that in the past something happened and humanity spent thousands of years clawing its way back from the so-called Stone Age. Mm-hmm. Their intent is that when and if cataclysm happens again, that they won't reset everything to zero and have to independently reinvent the wheel, literally, all over again.
Yeah, because that's what happened. That's really what happened.
Yes, went all the way back to where you had Og in the mouth of the cave telling, to his female counterpart wearing the saber-toothed tiger skin with a claw necklace saying, I'm getting tired of walking everywhere. If I just could pound this rock into this thing, let's call it a wheel, and I get a couple of these, maybe we could just roll around. Mm-hmm. And that, we took 10,000 years to recover from that point.
Sure.
And so they're aware of that, and their idea is, why waste 10,000 years? If it all gets blown to smithereens, we'll just wait it out underground. Then after a year or 2 years or 10 or 20 or whatever, we'll come back up and we'll start it all back up again. Why 1985? Why not say 1984?
Yeah, for sure. For sure, Richard. Richard, we've been discussing military reasoning and cataclysms, but I really think that both of them go hand in hand. The military are probably the only ones to carry out these resources and do it secretly. They may have military reasons for the bunkers, but they also have this possible cataclysm. And if they did have a cataclysm coming, and they did know, or maybe they just did it in case, but maybe they did know there was an asteroid coming in, they're not going to tell. They're not going to tell the population.
No, they won't tell anyone. They won't tell anyone. And it's not only the military with secret underground facilities. I mean, the Vatican, my understanding is the Vatican has a vast underground network. The Scientologists have some underground facilities. The Mormon Church has a very large, technically sophisticated underground facility in the Wasatch Mountains outside of Salt Lake City in Utah. Any wealthy tycoon can hire a mining crew and a tunnel boring crew and make his own secret underground facility. Someone like Bill Gates, who's worth tens of billions of dollars, could easily use some of his fortune to make his own private underground base. I would suspect he has done that. Someone like Warren Buffett, who I think also has tens of billions of dollars worth of financial assets, could also make his own
it's a very good
private
point,
underground
Richard.
facility.
You know,
I would guess that he has.
I would do it if I had the money, because I know as an astronomer from my it's an academic degree. It's not one I ever worked at, but I know from my own research of ancient history and ancient cultures and astronomy, it's just a matter of time before an asteroid comes in and has a good go at us. But if I had the money for a bunker, I would do it just because I had the spare change. I'm like, why not? That's what billionaires do. They buy the things that nobody else can.
Yes, and I would extend this also to undersea bases, underwater bases. And you might say, well, if you built an undersea base, if I were wealthy, why not also build your own secret undersea base or underwater base? I presume this has been done. Certainly military agencies such as the United States Navy have their undersea, underwater submarine bases. So how would you suppose you built such a base, how would you get to and from it? Well, with your own submarine, of course. And where would you get your own submarine? Well, you would buy military surplus. I have, in years past, just gone out on the internet and into major search engines, typed purchase surplus military submarine. And you can do that.
Wow,
you can
really?
buy an actual military submarine.
That's incredible.
I mean, a major submarine like 300 or 400 feet long with that can accommodate a crew of 100 men and dive 1,000 feet undersea, etc. So if you're Bill Gates or Buffett or whoever, and you have your own underground or sea base, you can also purchase for just a few $1 million a surplus military submarine and travel around.
With the breakup of the Soviet Union and other Eastern Bloc countries, everything went for hire then. All the components were released onto the market, that's for sure. Richard, I don't know if I remember watching an episode of UFO Hunters, and they had a feature on USOs, underwater submarines or underwater submarine objects and stuff like that. And off the coast of, I think it was Florida, there's a cable comes off from some military base on land down across the water, and it seems to go underneath this shelf and it goes straight down. It's a really thick communications cable. Are you aware of this place, Richard? Is this anything that's come up?
Well, there are submarine bases on the east coast of the United States at Groton, Connecticut, for example, and also down at Kings Bay, Georgia. And then getting back to the British Commonwealth, in the Bahamas, on Andros Island, South Andros Island. Of course, Bahamas are part of the British Commonwealth, a former British colony. The United States Navy has a major submarine base and undersea warfare center called AUTEC, AUTEC is the acronym.
Oh, I think this is
my
the place.
Understanding.
Yes, this is the place.
That there is a very large underground base beneath Andros Island, and that the largest submarines in the world, the Ohio-class nuclear missile firing submarines of the United States Navy, come in through undersea tunnels, underwater tunnels. They come into a vast underground dry dock area that can accommodate several large military submarines simultaneously. So that's one example off the east coast of Florida in the Bahamas of what the United States Navy can do. My understanding is that base goes back to the John F. Kennedy administration and perhaps even earlier. There's another one I've been told about, which is in the French Caribbean, on one of the French islands, that the French Navy has a similar facility. And this is, I noticed in the news recently the Chinese are building some artificial islands in the region of the Spratly Islands in the South China Sea.
Wow.
And, well, I believe one of the reasons they're doing this is probably to sink shafts down, and they will likely make undersea bases in that region, which they could provision with nuclear missiles, among other things. The world we live in is really not at all as we've been told it is. Side by side with our so-called everyday reality is a virtually science fiction-like reality that has been built up side by side with the public everyday society or culture to which we're exposed and into which we are born. It's important to understand that the wool has been pulled over our eyes.
Oh, for sure. I'm glad you mentioned that place. That was definitely the place I was talking about, OTEC. It's such a surreptitious agency, and I remember the communications cable down, it's going straight down and they couldn't follow it. And it's like, is this what we're going to pump our money into these days, Richard? Is this what the best of humanity has for nuclear warheads?
Well, some of it, a great deal of it is going into secret projects. Some of those secret projects certainly are underground and undersea bases. My guess is that there are also bases off-world, on the moon, for example, perhaps also on Mars, and maybe farther afield in the solar system, and maybe even in other solar systems. I believe that in this so-called black world, this parallel compartmentalized universe, which is massively funded with black budget money, running into the trillions of dollars, not millions, not billions, but trillions. And this is the American trillion, by the way. 1 million is 1,000 times 1,000.
Yeah.
1 billion is 1,000 times a million. 1 trillion is 1,000 times a billion. A trillion is defined differently in some of the European countries,
That's
but
correct.
I'm using the American trillion. It's a vast sums of money are disappearing from the global economy. And the question is, where are they going? Where's the money going? And the answer is almost certainly into tremendously compartmentalized black budget projects that the public is absolutely not being told about, but we can take some guesses based on my work and the work of some other researchers. I reiterate, a network of underground and undersea bases that greatly exceeds the ability of most people to imagine. And also probably off-planet activities, not only in orbit, but probably also on the moon and on Mars, and perhaps even deeper into this solar system and extending to other solar systems. Now, if that's the case, that implies that the space agencies like the European Space Agency, NASA, etc., are not the only game in town, that there are other agencies more secretive with another generation or two of technology that's much more powerful and much more sophisticated than chemical rockets. I am telling you openly, I believe those technological breakthroughs have been had, that we are being massively lied to, up, down, and sideways. An interesting guest for you, if you haven't had him on, would be Joseph Farrell. I
actually am in contact with Joseph, and I have tried to get him on the phone, on the call a few times. The timing hasn't worked out. He's such a busy guy, Dr. Joseph Farrell.
He is.
He's a prolific guy as well. Lovely guy.
Oh yeah, he's always writing something.
Oh yeah.
But his research, ratifies to a degree my own, in that you have this parallel technological and engineering effort that's going on, that's out of the public eye, and it's been going on for decades. His research, like mine, extends all the way back to the Nazi period, at least to the Nazi period and Nazi scientists and engineers, and continues right down to the present day. I'm telling you, there's a vast reality, a vast engineering, scientific, political, military, and social reality that has been developed out of the public eye, and 99% of the public are blissfully unaware, and that's the way it is.
Richard, I'm glad you brought that in. You've opened the door to a new show. Maybe we'll get you back to do that. I've touched on the hollow moon theory a few times, that there's tunnels there and there's bases there. I've touched on the Nazi element before in other shows, and I've never really taught it in terms of underground bases, but I definitely think there's the UFO or the extraterrestrial element. We haven't even touched on that, and I'm glad you brought that in because I did want to mention it. But perhaps we'll get you back.
Well, let me tell you before we sign off, that towards the end of my first book, that I ran across some documentation when I was researching the so-called nuclear subterranes, which are nuclear-powered machines for tunneling through solid rock. There was a design called the nuclear subsaline, which was a nuclear-powered machine intended to create a tunnel network beneath the surface of the moon. And the documentation that I found actually spoke of transporting this machine to the moon to create tunnels beneath the moon's surface, and actually gave an estimated dollar figure for how much it would cost to transport that subsaline tunneling machine to the moon, without, however, mentioning the precise mechanism of transport that would be used to take the machine from the Earth to the moon. So already in my very early research, I found the first hint, not just that people were thinking about doing that, but it actually given an estimated dollar figure for taking that machine to the moon. I'm guessing that may have been done.
Incredible, Richard. Incredible. Richard, we're out of time. What a super fascinating guy you are. I commend you on your research. I really, really do, and I mean that from my heart. Keep going, brother. It's interesting to see all this put together in the dynamic and intellectual way that you have, and great to see the political scientist mind behind this too. Of course, we're talking to Dr. Richard Sauder. Everybody there, if you want to check out his website, it's eventhorizonChronicle.blogspot.com. Check out this author. He's super fascinating. And Richard, I got to get you back on the show. We're going to touch on probably what we left off today in the not too distant future.
To university libraries, government document repositories, and archives, document archives, and things of that nature. So, for logical reasons, my research focused most intensively on the American aspect of underground and underwater bases and tunnels.
Wow, fascinating. Yeah, Richard, I think there's a underground city or underground bunker in England. It's got its own BBC broadcasting studio and public house for drinking, and it's a wartime one, I think. Yeah, now that you sparked that memory off.
Well, there were in World War II and in the Cold War era, there was a fair amount of tunneling and underground excavation for command posts and things of that nature. Ostensibly, the Cold War is over, but it looks like the tensions with Russia are higher than ever before because of the United Kingdom and the United States ratcheting up the tensions. It's coming from them. It's not coming from the Russians. I'm persuaded the Russians do not want another world war. I think that the leadership of the United Kingdom and of the United States are, as the English say, barking mad.
I agree, Richard. I live in Northern Ireland, so I'm going to agree with you, Richard.
David, let's take David Cameron, for example.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen anything more pathetic in your life? Just a weak, stupid, ignorant, arrogant man.
Richard, you hit the nail on the head. He's like a man with no backbone. He is the embodiment of a person without a backbone. He's just...
Well, and he's a clone of Barack Obama, they're brothers from another mother.
Mm-hmm.
And Barack Obama is the same. He's stupid, he's ignorant, he's weak, and he is surpassing arrogant.
It makes you wonder.
These men compensate for their tremendous incompetence, ignorance, and stupidity with endless arrogance.
Makes you wonder.
I've never seen anything like it.
Makes you wonder then, Richard, in that respect, what you're saying, are these guys like puppets? Are they just being told what to do? Are they stooges?
They are puppets. In the case of David Cameron, clearly he's taking orders from, among other places, well, of course, from the City of London, from the Windsors, from Buckingham Palace. In the case of Barack Obama, he's clearly taking orders from Wall Street, from the Federal Reserve Bank, and you have to wonder what's above all of that. I mean, what's behind the Bank of England? What's behind the Windsors? What's behind the City of London? What's behind the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States? What's behind Wall Street? There is some very evil, hideous, grotesque power operating from the shadows on this planet, and it absolutely is pulling the puppet strings of these men. I don't know if they are men. Is David Cameron really a natural human being? Is Barack Obama really a natural human being? I have questions.
Research and interest and education. You've got quite a diverse background of education, and that stands to anybody in research. So let's get into a little bit about that. Why the variety of research? Is this who you are? Is this you like to educate and research yourself in all fields, Richard?
Yes, I have a lot of curiosity about most everything, and I just got caught up in academic pursuits for about 10 or 11 years and accumulated several academic titles. I am not a professional academic. I do not work for or at any university or college, nor do I intend to. I want to say that I've been out of the academic world for many years and never worked in it, having gone through 3 different graduate degree programs. I saw how corrupt and restrictive the mainstream academic world is.
Oh, yeah.
I think even more so now than it was 20 and 30 years ago when I got caught up in academic pursuits. However, in the process of doing all of that academic work, I did learn how to research, how to do a thorough archival investigation, which has stood me in good stead in conducting the research for the books that I've written. There is one book that I have out now that you didn't mention. It's entitled Hidden in Plain Sight.
Sure.
Beyond the X-Files. That's Hidden in Plain Sight, Beyond the X-Files. And in that book, I go even more deeply into the theme of underground and underwater bases and show how this actually goes back centuries to the 19th century and even before. This business of tunneling, of building underground bases, and even to make the underwater bases, at the least, we're talking about going back to the 1960s, and I suspect even earlier. The technology has been around to construct sophisticated undersea bases and tunnels for the better part of a century, and to tunnel underground. Well, people have been tunneling underground for many, many years. I actually give a couple of examples from England.
Oh, yeah.
In the book Hidden in Plain Sight, beyond the X-Files. It's not just the Americans who have been tunneling for many years. The English have, the French have, the Germans have, the Russians have, the Chinese. It's pretty well going on all over the world. My research has focused primarily on activities centered on the United States, because I hold United States citizenship, and at the time I conducted my research, I was living in the continental United States, so I had access.
Hi everybody, and welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and I'm delighted to be talking to a super interesting guest today, Mr. Richard Sauder, Dr. Richard Sauder, a highly educated man, and a little bit of background on Richard before I bring him on. In his early childhood, he experienced first-hand contact with some paranormal phenomena, and that left him a little bit puzzled and thoroughly persuaded that there is much more to the earth than what human perception tells us. Consciousness, mainstream American culture believes. Richard's favourite research and reading interests are underground and underwater bases and tunnels, and that's what we're going to get into today. We're also going to talk maybe a little bit about electronic mind control, human prehistory, which is something really fascinating to me, remote antiquity, the area of history I like to get into, Kundalini energy, and more. A little bit about Dr. Richard Sauder's background, his education. He has a BA in sociology, an MA in Latin American studies, an MS in forestry, and a PhD in political science. He's the author of several books, Underground Bases and Tunnels, What is the Government Trying to Hide?, Kundalini Tales, Underground and Underwater Bases. In addition, Richard has also appeared on a variety of radio and TV programs and is now in the Capricorn Radio Hall of Fame. So without further ado, hi Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you, James. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you here, Richard. It really is, and I love this search. I love this topic, this truth search that I'm on the show, and I'm not particularly well read up on the subject, but I know you are, and I know you've done a pioneering research. So I first of all commend you on that, Richard. This is fascinating. Before we get into, I guess, any of the subject matter today, I'm always interested in the person. You look like a polymath with your variety of intriguing